All right, so we started yesterday doing which ones were bigger, which integers were bigger. And we said the farther to the left, the smaller, the farther to the right, the bigger. That's the key to remembering it. Just farther left is smaller, farther right is bigger. Okay? But sometimes you'll have a list of numbers that you've got to put in order. And this is where it can get a little tricky because you might have a fraction and a decimal and whole numbers all in the same problem. And so that's what we're going to focus on today is what to do when that happens. So we started this part yesterday. It says how to, and this is inside of your notes, make two groups, one for positive and one for negative. Change all the fractions to decimals. Change all the fractions to decimals. Okay, we can do that with a calculator. Okay, and you can use a calculator to do that. Okay, line up the decimals and then put them in order. Remember how we did that. We lined them up, we made them the same length, and then we decided which one was bigger and which one was smaller. Remember, when we're on the negatives, it looks just the opposite as the positives, right? So if you have -5, that may look bigger because it's the number 5, but it's still smaller than -4. Okay, so it's just the opposite in the negatives. That's the main reason to divide it into two groups. All right, so let's go to this set. This is inside of your notes. We're going to do this together. So it said, first of all, let's divide them into negatives and positives. So I already gave you a box there. So let's put all the negative numbers. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, why don't we change the fractions into decimals? Let's do that. And I know you don't have a calculator right now, so we're going to do this together. So let's change. So -1 is fine. -14 is fine. -1/2. What is that as a decimal? Who knows? What is it? 0.5. So that's 0.5. Okay, how about 3/4? Anybody know what that is? What is that? 0.75. And then how about 1/5? You know that one? Yeah. 0.2. Good. You got these memorized. 0.2. Okay. Now, one key about this, though. We just changed all of those into decimals, and we can use that to put them in order. But there is one thing you have to remember. If they give you a problem with fractions, you have to give your answer in fractions. Because more than likely, it's going to be multiple choice. And they're not going to give you the decimal answer. They're going to give you the fraction answer. That's why it's so important to be able to switch. Because it's really easy to switch these into decimals and then find an answer. But you have to be able to translate it back. Okay, so we're going to talk about that more in just a second. But let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to put some boxes around all the negatives. So we have -1, -14, and -25. So it says from least to greatest. So of those three negative numbers, which one's the smallest? Good, -25. I'm going to cross it out so I don't forget I've used it. Which one is the next smallest? -14, and the next smallest? -1. Okay, we got our negatives out of the way. Got that. Okay? Now let's talk about the positives. They are in decimals, at least 3 of them are, so we've got to decide. So let's just write those 3 up and down. Actually, let's write all of them. So we have 6. I'm just going to write it up and down. You'll see why in a second. So I'm going to write 6, and then I'm going to write 0.5. Then I'm going to write 0.75. Then I'm going to write 0.2. Everybody see where I got that from? Yeah. Okay. And then, hold on one second, okay? And then remember, we got to line up our decimals. So I'm going to put a decimal right there. That's why it's so important you remember. A whole number has a decimal at the end. Okay, and then we've got to make them all the same length if we want to be able to compare them, because that's easier to see. So each one is going to need 2 numbers behind the decimal because 0.75 has 2 numbers behind the decimal. Okay, you with me so far? Now, if we look at those, we're in positives, right? So which one of those, since we're going least to greatest, which one is the smallest? 0.2. So 0.2, but we can't write it as 0.2. We have to write it as the fraction they gave us. So our next number is 1/5. You see where I'm getting it from? Okay. So which one comes next? Yeah, 50, because 20 is smaller, 50 is next. So 50 is what fraction? Good. Okay, and then which one comes next? 75, that's the next one. So that's what fraction? 3/4. And then finally, 600 is definitely the biggest, so 6 is our biggest number. So I'm going to go down here to the bottom. Let's write them in order. We have negative 25, negative 14, negative 1, 1/5, 1/2, 3/4, and 6.